Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into Minneapolis, where a fatal shooting by federal agents absolutely lit a match, sparking a firestorm that escalated into a high-stakes standoff with massive national implications. We're going to unpack exactly how this whole crisis unfolded.
And that right there, that's Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. He's using some incredibly powerful language to paint a picture of the situation on the ground. You know, it's this kind of rhetoric that can turn a local incident into a national firestorm. So what actually happened to get us to this point?
All right, here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the street-level incident that started it all. Then, we'll explore the two totally warring narratives that popped up almost immediately. From there, we'll see how this whole thing sparked a government shutdown threat and what the White House did to try and get a handle on it. And finally, we'll tackle the big question: what in the world comes next?
So it all began with one single, incredibly chaotic event, right there on the streets of Minneapolis. You had federal agents conducting this high-stakes operation, and in a flash, that operation took a deadly turn.
So right in the middle of this operation, agents run into Alex Prey, an ICU nurse who, and this is a key detail, had a legal permit to carry a concealed weapon. What happened next is just a chaotic blur of whistles, shouting, and a physical scuffle, all of it captured on video. Prey resisted, and in that chaos, he was shot and killed. And just like that, this one death completely fractured the narrative, creating two profoundly different, totally competing realities.
And this is where things get really interesting, because how you saw this event depended entirely on which side of the political aisle you were sitting on. I mean, the two stories that emerged could not be more different.
Just look at this slide. It perfectly captures the deep division. On one side, you've got the pro-enforcement view. This was a lawful operation targeting dangerous criminals, and their agents were attacked by what they called a low-level insurgency. From their perspective, Prey was violently resisting arrest and frankly had no business being there. But then, on the other side, you have the view that a U.S. citizen was straight up murdered by untrained thugs who were violating constitutional rights, and that is the view that led Governor Walz to make those wild comparisons to Nazis and the Gestapo.
And critics like Tommy Viador, who used to advise President Obama, they painted this really damning picture of a lawless, out-of-control federal force that was making the streets more dangerous, not less. But then you flip it, and you've got law enforcement reps like Paul Perez, president of the Border Patrol Union, and they saw it completely differently. They argued that that very rhetoric was what was inciting the violence and putting their agents' lives at risk. And you know, this war of words didn't stay in Minneapolis. It spilled over and it hit the halls of Congress fast.
So as things were heating up in Minneapolis, the political shockwaves hit Washington, D.C., and they hit hard. This whole thing ignited a high-stakes funding battle that actually threatened to shut down parts of the federal government.
Okay, so picture this. Senate Democrats pointing to what they're calling a lawless Department of Homeland Security. They just dig in their heels and say, nope, we're not funding the agency. This, of course, prompts Republicans to warn of a partial government shutdown, which could have a real impact on agencies you and I rely on, like the TSA and FEMA. Now, here's the kicker. The threat was mostly symbolic when it came to ICE because their funding was already locked in for years. But it was a huge political power move, right? It was designed to put immense pressure on the White House to do something.
With the situation totally spinning out of control and the political pressure just mounting, President Trump knew he had to make a move. He decided to hit the reset button and send in a new point person to take charge of the whole crisis. So he appoints this guy, Tom Homan, a career law enforcement officer, former ICE director, as a special envoy, a so-called border czar. Homan was a figure respected in the law enforcement community, and his mission was pretty clear: de-escalate everything, report directly back to the president, and somehow find a way to get state and local officials to cooperate.
And Homan didn't show up empty-handed. The White House laid out a really clear path to de-escalation. President Trump presented three, quote, common-sense cooperative measures that he wanted Minnesota's leaders to get on board with.
The deal they put on the table was pretty simple, really. If Minnesota's leaders agreed to cooperate on these 3 points, then that big group of Customs and Border Patrol agents, you know, the ones right at the center of all the street clashes, they would pull out. In their place, a much smaller ICE team would stay behind to work peacefully with local police.
So this brings us to the million-dollar question, doesn't it? After all the chaos, all the finger-pointing, and all the crazy rhetoric, can these two sides actually find a way to work together, or is the damage just too much?
Now, this is where things take a really fascinating turn.
After a direct phone call between President Trump and Governor Walz, the whole tone on both sides just shifts, dramatically. All of a sudden, the same people who were trading these huge insults just days before were now using the exact same word, cooperation. It really felt like a genuine off-ramp from this crisis was finally on the table.
But, and this is a big but, underneath all that new conciliatory language, the fundamental conflict is still just simmering right below the surface. Federal officials argue that Minneapolis' sanctuary city policies are the root cause of this entire mess. Their argument is pretty simple. When local jails won't hand over criminal aliens, it forces federal agents to do these dangerous raids out on the streets. And it was one of those raids that led to the death of Alex Prey.
So Tom Homan's arrival in Minneapolis, it really does represent a potential reset, right? It's a chance to lower the temperature and find some common ground. But for that to happen, both sides are going to have to step back from the political brink. So the question remains, will Minneapolis become a blueprint for cooperation? Or will it just be a chilling warning of the deeper divisions that are threatening to pull us apart? The answer is still very much up in the air.